that out because, Mr. Wesley was the original. Daniel, Daniel chapter number 9. I'm glad we have fun with that. Daniel chapter number 9. We left off at somewhere between 69 and 70 weeks. So that'll be in verse number 20 with an important date. We said this was a important revelation, probably the most important revelation in the Old Testament, maybe one of the most important in all of the Bible, and the key to interpreting these 70 weeks was that they applied only to the time period of the Jews dwelling in their own land, and it didn't cover the dispersion. It took up the history of the Jews and the city of Jerusalem only when they were occupying their own land. And so that helps clarify. And as I restudied these verses this week, I came across a new source, and I was reading some of this man's writings and studyings, and he pointed something out that I had totally read over, and it was that this interpretation was given to bring clarity. And yet, as Gabriel here says that, he's interpreting this, and he's come here to inform Daniel in verse 22, and he's giving him skill and understanding at the end of verse 22, and he's come here at the end of verse 23 to make him understand the matter. This is all given to help Daniel understand, and it's given to bring clarity and help understanding, and yet we get lost in the details, and it brings us so much confusion. And so we'll try to clarify some of that this week if we can, and we'll remind you of what we're studying. We'll start reading at verse number 20 in Gabriel's interpretation of Daniel's 70 weeks here. He says, "And whiles I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin, the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my supplication before the Lord my God for the holy mountain of my God, yea, while I was speaking in prayer, even the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, touched me about the time of the evening oblation. And he informed me and talked with me and said, O Daniel, I am now come forth to give thee skill and understanding. And at the beginning of thy supplications, the commandment came forth, and I am come to show thee, for thou art greatly beloved. Therefore understand the matter and consider the vision. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon the holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks, and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. And the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate." And so we find here that these 70 weeks are broken up, as we mentioned last week, into several smaller periods. We're given a period of 7 weeks and then 62 weeks, that being together 69 weeks, which leaves us 1 week. And that 1 week we find at the end of verse 27, he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And that's the last week, the 70th week. And we're not going to go back and replow all the old ground that we talked about last week, but I want to point out some new things this week that we've observed, and And that is, while Daniel was speaking, he says here, in praying and confessing his sin, the sin of his people, in verse 20, presenting his supplication before the Lord my God for the holy mountain of my God, he says, while I was speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, this is the angel, Gabriel, whom I had seen the beginning of the vision, he flew swiftly, touched me about the time of the evening oblation. I want you to see here that Daniel had a desire to know a few things. But also know that Daniel's desire was towards worship. And this is what I was new to me this week when I restudied these passages. And I know we started these last week, and yet even as I restudied to present this week, I saw even new material in this never ending well of information that we get from the Scriptures. These words, oblation, which we see twice in this short passage, jumped out at me. And Daniel is here marking time. And he's marking the time that he is praying, and he's marking the time that he sees the angel come to him by a specific mark in time of the evening oblation, which would be about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And this evening oblation is a time of worship. It's a time when the sacrifices would be offered. But yet, Daniel's a captive. He's a captive in the land of Babylon, and Babylon has just fallen, and he's been carried away as a captive into the Babylonian nation, and now he's lived there for some 67, 68 years, and he knows that now it is time nearing for the prophecy to be fulfilled, when he's going to be allowed, the Jews will be allowed to go back to their own land, and he's beginning to seek how it is that God is going to move in history. And he's seen the Medo-Persian Empire come in and defeat the Babylonian Empire. And yet all of this time, you see what he's doing. Nearly 70 years later, he's marking time by worship. He's marking time by, it's time for the evening oblation. It's time for the evening, the afternoon sacrifice. That this man and this people has not observed in 7 decades. I had to stop and think. I had to stop and ponder. Because how things have changed in our society, and how they've changed so quickly. And as we have moved from a society of work and building up and saving and delayed gratification to a society of instant gratification, we see that even amongst the people of God. We have fast food, and we have microwaves. You know, you go down the aisle of the grocery store now, and you don't have food that you have to prepare. You have microwave dishes that you just pop in the microwave and open the bag, and it's immediately ready for you. And we have drive-ins where you just have, give them your order, hand them some money, and here's the food ready and hot. We're a society of instant gratification. Look at social media. And we've become a society of drive-through worship, haven't we? I can't begin to tell you the number of persons that I am personally familiar with that have told me our churches have changed. We're not going back to worship the way it was. We like online worship. We like our family gathered around a screen. We like our family gathered, together in their pajamas. It's hard to complete. It's hard to fulfill all of the together commands of worship online. And I am one that has been encouraging and will continue to encourage. And I am blessed. And I want to be a blessing to those that participate in our social networks and in our online presence. And I want to continue that. And I want to continue our young men and bless and encourage our young men that are reaching out in that manner. And I want it to grow. And I want us to do more. But I look here at Daniel, and nearly 70 years later, in a foreign land where they haven't worshipped in nearly 7 decades, he's marking the blessings and he's marking the prayers by what should have been the time for worship. It's time for the evening sacrifice. No, we can't go. We can't do it. We can't participate in it. And we don't have a temple and we don't have an altar and we can't slay the lamb. But if we could, this is the right time. This is the time we would. This is the time to go. And he says it's time for the evening oblation. And that's the time I met this man called Gabriel. And I just wonder if we share that same desire for the time of our worship. My, have things changed. And quickly. It's been just a year. And for Daniel, it was 70 plus. But then we come to Gabriel, the angel's explanation of this, what we can call a great parentheses. And we led up to some of this last week. And you know, we left with many more questions than we left with answers. As I said, Gabriel came and he expresses to Daniel that he wants to give him skill and understanding, and he wants to give him clarity, and he wants to give him information. And it's been hundreds of years, and we still have more questions than we have answers. In fact, if you read the early church fathers, some of the early church fathers in their sermons, in their writings, actually said, there's a variation of opinion on here, and I'm just going to give you the opinions of others and let you pick out which one you like best. I'm going to do a little bit different than that. I'm going to give you my opinion and let you pick whether or not you agree with me. And if we agree, that's great. If we don't agree, that's okay too, because whatever you think of these passages, you'll be in good company because you'll find good men that will agree with you on them. So the questions we have is, does week 70 immediately follow week 69? Is there a gap between week 69 and week 70? And last week we said that at least Brother Steve thinks that the beginning of the 70 weeks starts with the command that was given to Nehemiah to go rebuild the walls and the city of Jerusalem, and that it ended at the triumphal entry. Now there's some, divergence of opinion on that. So some think that the last week follows that time. Some claim that the 69th week ended when Jesus was born, and that the middle of the 70th week is the crucifixion, and the remainder of the 70th week is in process of fulfillment. And it's been 2,000 years for 3.5 of whatever those days represent. That doesn't reconcile with any time scale, in my opinion. So what is it that happens between week 69 and week 70? We do know that from verse 26. The vision of the evening. Let me get to the right chapter. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. The people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood. And unto the end of the war desolations are determined. So what happens between week 69 and week 70? We know that Messiah the Prince is definitely a reference to Christ. and we know that he is cut off. That is an Old Testament metaphor for death. It's for being killed. So that is obviously a reference to the crucifixion. And it says here that he'll be cut off, but not for himself. Well, what does that mean? He's cut off for someone else, not for himself. Verse 24 tells us why. He's making an end of sin. He's making reconciliation for iniquity. He's not cut off for himself, but he's cut off for your sins and for my sins. Tells us further that Messiah will be cut off, not for himself, and the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. What prince is this? There's a lot of confusion as to what prince this is, and so I'm just going to tell you what I believe. The people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. We have the benefit of history to help us. The people that destroyed the city and the sanctuary was Rome. It was the Romans. About 70 A.D., Rome came, and under the Emperor Titus, Jerusalem was destroyed, the temple was destroyed, and so the people that would come would be the Romans. The Romans destroyed the temple. The Romans destroyed the city of Jerusalem. And so a prince would come that would be of the same nationality. He would be from the same people that destroyed the city and that destroyed the sanctuary. So who is this prince that would come that would be Roman in nationality? Well, now if you're amillennial, you have a problem if you think that the prince that would come was this man that we studied a couple of weeks ago, Antiochus Epiphanes, because he was not Roman. And so I believe that that man was just a foreshadowing of this prince that would come. This prince that shall come is, I believe, the Antichrist. So there would be a long period of wars. During this period, Jerusalem would be trodden down by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. So let's go to the New Testament, and we'll pick up a couple of verses, a couple of things that Jesus says about this that gives us some clues as to how to interpret these verses. Go to John chapter 4. In John chapter number 4, Jesus says a couple of things that help us to understand what Daniel might be referring to here. John chapter number 4, of course, he's speaking to a woman here outside of Jacob's well near the Mount Gerizim. John 4 verse 20, this lady says to him, "Our fathers worshipped in this mountain, and you say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship." Jesus says unto her, "Woman, believe me, the hour cometh when ye shall neither in this mountain nor yet at Jerusalem worship the Father. You worship ye know not what. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. But the hour cometh, and now is, when true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and truth. The Father seeketh such to worship him." What did Jesus say there? Jesus says the rightful place of worship now is in Jerusalem, for salvation is of the Jews. But the time is coming. The time is coming in the very near future when Jerusalem's not going to be the place of worship either. What did he just say? Well, two things. First of all, worship is not about a place. It's about a person. It's about Christ. And I think he's saying there that Jerusalem, if you understand the prophecy in Daniel, Jerusalem's going to be destroyed. It's going to be destroyed by the Gentiles. Remember, Jesus also says that there's going to be a time when the Gentiles will be grafted in, and so it's an indication that, remember, the the Jews went back to Jerusalem and they rebuilt the city, they rebuilt the temple, they reestablished their worship, and Jesus is there during that period of time. And just a few years after Christ was crucified, Rome comes in and destroys all of that again. And that's what he's saying there. There's coming a time when you're not going to worship at Jerusalem either. But yet, he also says that there's coming another time when worship will be reestablished in Jerusalem. And so it's an allusion to the fact that Jerusalem's going to be rebuilt. And then it's going to be destroyed. And it's going to be rebuilt again. There's a delay in this prophecy, right? Go to Luke chapter 21. There's a long period of wars. During this period, Jerusalem's going to be trodden down until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. Luke chapter 21. Look at verse 24. They shall fall by the edge of the sword and shall be led away captive into all nations. Who's he speaking of? He's speaking of the Jews. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. So there's a period of time, it's the time of the Gentiles, and that time of the Gentiles will be fulfilled. And while that time of the Gentiles is being fulfilled, Jerusalem's going to be trodden underfoot. And again, this, what he's alluding to here, what he's giving information on is the fact that Jerusalem's not going to exist under Jewish rule. But there's coming a period of time when the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled that Jerusalem's going to come back under Jewish rule. Again, Jerusalem's been rebuilt. It's going to be destroyed. It's going to be rebuilt again. Okay? That's a cycle that's coming. So let's jump back to Daniel now. Back in Daniel chapter number 9. Again, verse number 24. Messiah is going to be cut off, but not for himself. He dies for others. 1 Peter 2:24. Speaking of Jesus, says his own self bare our sins in his own body on the tree, that we being dead to sins should live to righteousness. By his stripes we were healed. He receives no crown. He has no throne to the kingdom at this period in time. He receives a throne. He receives a kingdom at his second coming. He sets up a millennial reign literally in Jerusalem. And so the city and the sanctuary would be destroyed. Consider this. When Jesus comes into Jerusalem at the triumphal entry, the week before his crucifixion, the day after he comes into Jerusalem, the day after the triumphal entry, Jesus predicts the fall of Jerusalem. Remember, he says, you tear this down, and he says there's coming a day when one stone will not be left upon another. Again, you can read about that in Luke chapter 21. That day came to pass 40 years later, 70 AD, under the Roman Emperor Titus. After that Roman Emperor Titus destroyed Jerusalem, Jerusalem has never again been under Jewish rule until 1948. 1948, most of Jerusalem came back under Jewish rule when Israel was reestablished as a nation. There's a lot of confusion. This generation shall not pass away and all that sort of stuff. A generation is not 70 years. This week is not 70 years. It is 7 years. Okay, so let's not get confused about that. And let's not get confused about, the 1948 started another clock, and the clock started in 1948 because Israel was recognized as a state. Not necessarily the case, because it's been 70 plus years since then, right? And so we don't know when God's timetable for that week starts. I'll say this. Israel has been reestablished. Israel has been recognized as a nation. But we pointed out last week that this prophecy specifically talked about both the nation of Israel and the city of Jerusalem being specifically under Jewish rule. Jerusalem's not under Jewish rule right now. Not the entire city, not all of it, right? They're still squabbling over some parts of it. There's still some fighting going on over parts of Jerusalem over there. And this prophecy is specific for all of Israel and all of the city of Jerusalem being under a king in Jerusalem. So, I can't tell you I know when the timeline starts. I can tell you this. Verse 26 tells us, Christ, 62 shall Messiah be cut off, not for himself, and the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end thereof be with a flood. Unto the end of the war desolations are determined. There will be a prince that will come of the same nationality as the people who should destroy the city and the sanctuary. I think Gabriel just got very specific with Daniel. Okay? That prince is not a reference to Messiah. That reference is to a future prince that will be of the same nationality as the people that destroy the city of Jerusalem. At this point in time, Jerusalem hasn't been rebuilt. Remember? That order for Nehemiah to go rebuild hasn't been given yet. And so, Jerusalem's not rebuilt, therefore it's not been destroyed. So, he hasn't seen the end of the 7 weeks, so he hasn't seen the end of the 62 weeks. He has no idea where this 69 weeks ends at. Follow me so far? We have the benefit of history. We know that it was the Romans that destroyed the city, and so that prince that shall come is Roman. We also know from the 2 previous chapters that we studied of Daniel's prophecy that there's a prince that is to come in a time that is far, far removed from Daniel's day. That's Daniel's horns, okay? The prince is the same prince that we called the little horn in chapter 7. He's also called a little horn in chapter 8. In chapter 7 and in chapter 8, we established that that little horn was the Antichrist. And so here, when we get to Daniel chapter 9, we know this. Daniel knows 3 of the 4 coming empires. He knows 3 of the 4 ruling empires. He knows for a fact Babylon, and he knows it by name. He knows Medo-Persia, and he knew it by name. He knows Greece. He knows where they're coming from. He knew who these ruling world powers were going to be. We don't know that he ever identified the Roman Empire. We don't know that he ever knew the Roman Empire by name. Hence, it says here, a prince that shall come, there will be the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city. We identified that nation because of what happened in 70 AD. Now, here's what we know. The little horn, chapter 7, the little horn, chapter 8, Antichrist, chapter 9, is the last ruler of the Roman Empire. Does that fit? Is he one of the 10 from the Roman Empire? Yes. Is he one of the 4 leading world powers that was folded into the Greek Empire? Yes. Is he the little horn? Certainly could be. The prince of the people that destroyed the temple. Who destroyed the temple and Jerusalem in 70 AD? Rome. We're pretty sure, again, you're getting Steve's interpretation. There's a lot of folks that disagree. There's a lot of people that have different interpretations of this, but you're getting my preponderance of the evidence here. We're pretty clear that the Antichrist will come from Rome. from that within that area. So what else do we know here? Palestine is going to be desolate. Palestine is desolate until the 70 weeks are ended. We know what happens at the end of 7 weeks. At the end of 7 weeks, we have the end, the close of Old Testament prophecy. Then at the end of an additional 62 weeks, so at the end of 69 weeks, Messiah is cut off. Or we have the Messiah Prince that comes, and that's the triumphal entry. Between 69 and 70 weeks is when Messiah is cut off. We see the temple and Jerusalem that are destroyed. We see the time of the Gentiles. That's all in the gap between week 69 and week 70. Palestine's going to be desolate until the 70 weeks are ended. God had warned the Israelites that if they obeyed, the land would be a land of milk and honey. If they disobeyed, the land would cast them out. It would reject them. That's exactly what happened. Joel predicts the restoration of the land. You can read about that in Joel chapter number 2, specifically starting at verse number 24. So all of those things that we've talked about today happen after week 69, but before week 70. All of that is to try to make this one point to you. Daniel was dedicated and desirous to worship. But I want you to see this one thing, because this will help me, and I believe it will help you. Verse number 20 says, "And while I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, while I was presenting my supplication before the Lord my God from my holy mountain," he says, "Yea, while I was speaking in prayer, even the man Gabriel, who had seen the vision at the beginning, flew swiftly, touched me about the time of the evening oblation." I want you to see that so many times we bring our prayers and we bring our petitions to God, and we think like, well, yeah, whenever you get around to it, whenever you get some spare time, God, whenever you can work little old me into your schedule. Now, we spent 3 weeks breaking down this prayer in the first 19 verses of chapter 9. Any of you folks that are dads out there, if one of your sons or daughters came with that kind of a prayer, do you think you'd say, "Go away, kid, you bug me, I'll get around to you next week"? When one of your children comes and says, "I've been filthy, I've been rotten, I've been stinking terrible to you, and I want you to forgive me." Yeah. We'll take care of that later. Does that make sense to anybody? Because here we read that Daniel says, while I was speaking, while I was confessing, yea, while I was speaking in prayer, even Gabriel flew swiftly. It's like God's got the answer. He was just waiting for you to bow your head and pray. And these are the heavenly beings that, can appear instantly. These are the ones that can come out of nowhere. And he says, while I was speaking, the angel's wings are just fluttering to get here. It's like Gabriel's in a hurry. I got to get over here to Daniel and tell him that I got to touch him. I got to tap him on the shoulder and say, yeah, God's just been waiting on you to get on your knees. And he says, "You're greatly beloved." And God wants to explain everything to you. And so, while Daniel has this desire, God's already got the answer. God's already sent the answer. God's already made all the provisions, and God's already got the timetable laid out. And I want you to say, and this is what just thrilled me when I read it this week. The delay wasn't in the answer. The delay here was just, hold on, man. The answer is, sometimes yes, and it's sometimes no, and it's sometimes not yet. But the answer is always, hang on, we got to work out some details. Let me work out some details here. While I was praying, God already sent the angel, and the angel wasn't hitchhiking, and the angel didn't take his time. The angel was flying. Your text said swiftly. I don't know how fast angels move, but they don't take the bus, and they don't take the train. And I don't know if angels move as fast as the speed of light, but Gabriel was in a hurry. And Gabriel said, Daniel, just hang on. God's got every answer that you require. He's got every answer figured out for you. He's got all the information. He wants you to know you're greatly beloved. God loves you. And hold on, he's just got to work out some details before it all arrives. And I think maybe that's the real key to this chapter. Because to be honest with you, if this was to give Daniel skill and understanding, it gives me more questions than it gives me answers. And so all of these things occur between week 69 and week 70. And we're not real sure about when week 70 starts. We're not real sure about all these dates and all this timeline. In fact, most preachers tell you there's a lot of interpretations, pick one. So verse 27. And he, that is the prince that shall come, he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the middle of the week, the midst of the week, shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. And so this is that last week. This is week number 70. And I don't know when it starts. I can't tell you. I just don't know. I know I can tell you when the middle gets here. He, this prince that confirms the covenant with many for a week. I know what has to happen. The Jews are going to be completely gathered back into Israel. And they're going to revive their sacrificial system of worship. You remember earlier we talked about that word oblation. The sacrifice. The morning and the evening oblation. That's when the prayers were offered. That's when the animals were slain and they were laid on the altar and they were sacrificed. And he, this prince, this Antichrist, shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. He's going to stop worship. And by the way, for him to stop worship, the Jews have to reestablish worship. They're not doing that right now. So the Jews are going to be completely gathered back into Israel. They're going to resume and revive their sacrificial system of worship. And this Antichrist, this prince of the people that destroyed Jerusalem the last time, is going to make a covenant with many. But again, look at the mercy of God. He shall confirm the covenant with many for a week. Not all. He doesn't say he makes a covenant with everybody. And even in this period of time, God has a remnant. Do you know that God always has a remnant? He always has a faithful few. He always has a righteous, a redeemed remnant. Revelation chapter 7 speaks of 144,000 that will not collaborate or bow the knee to Antichrist. And that 144,000 is specifically Jews that will not collaborate with the Antichrist. He confirms this covenant for a week. That's the last week. It's the period that we know as the tribulation. Halfway through that week, he causes the sacrifices to cease. There's some other things that happen. We'll study those in a couple of chapters. For the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. There's coming a time when Christ returns, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. There's coming a judgment. There is coming a judgment by Christ himself. And when Jesus Christ himself will come back from heaven, and he will defeat Antichrist, he will set up his own kingdom. It's a kingdom that is established in righteousness, judgment. And this Antichrist and beast, this satanic trinity, will be put down. This 70th week, to me, is fairly clear, applying to the last indignation that we know as the tribulation period. And it talks here about that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. There's a judgment day coming. There's a day coming when Christ judges. And his judgments start with these abominations. He judges the nations for their wickedness. He judges the nations for how they've treated Israel. He's going to judge men and women for how they've handled his book, for how they've treated his prophets, for how they've considered the Messiah. And as Daniel looked towards that day, he was marking time by worship. And he desired to be in a state where he could worship. And when Gabriel explained these things to him, and I understand the prophecies get complicated, and I may have just raised more questions than I gave you answers. But here's what I know for certain. No matter how you interpret this, God's got history in control. He knows what he's doing. He knows when he's doing it. He knows why he's doing it. And he knows when he's coming, where he's coming, why he's coming, and he knows who he's coming for. He's got it all under control. And no matter how confused we get, sometimes the answer to our prayer has already occurred. There's just a delay while God works out the details. Because in our life, just like these things here, God's determined good for us. And he's determined a judgment upon Satan and his evil spirits, and upon the evil nations that have mistreated God's people all throughout history. If you do nothing else for this chapter, the days and the numbers and the number of days and the number of weeks and the number of years are irrelevant. They're interesting to study. But you need to know that there's a judgment day coming. Are you ready for that day? Let's stand. Brother Derek, if you'll come, we'll just sing one verse. If I can pray with you, help you, explain anything to you, glad to share that with you. Number, brother.
156.